I think it's perhaps the most human thing in the world to want to get even with somebody, to take revenge on somebody who's wronged you or wronged someone you love. Now, justice may be sweet, but revenge, carrying out your own form of justice, is even sweeter. I wonder how many people waste away their time thinking of ways, fantasizing about the downfall of their enemy, the one who did them wrong. One of my youngest son's favorite movies when he was a kid was Back to the Future. Some of you may remember it. You remember the hero with an unlikely name of Marty McFly was unhappy with his life and was particularly unhappy with his Casper milquetoast father, George, who was bullied and mocked by his supervisor with the wonderful name Biff Tannen. Marty thought through the efforts of an eccentric scientist with too many plot twists and wrinkles to discuss here, goes back in time and is looking for a way to reverse the fate of his father, to take his father out of the funk that he has gotten into with his life and his marriage, and as things go along, also to take revenge on Biff. At the end of the movie, the odious Biff is working for his father, who is now a successful novelist. And rather than bullying his father and lording it over him, he's doing menial jobs like washing his father's car. The tables are well and truly turned, and I have to admit it's pretty satisfying. This sort of table turning, even setting, getting revenge is immensely popular. As a society, as a people, we eat this stuff up. I did a very short survey of contemporary movies looking to see which ones that had vengeance or getting even at the core of the movie, of the story. I found 4: The Unholy Trinity, Pariah, Ghost Trail, and Ice Road Vengeance. Well, you got that right there in the title. That last one stars Liam Neeson, who's made a career of doing these movies. His vengeance has left piles of bodies in movies like Taken and Cold Pursuit. No, there's nothing so human as looking for a way to pay back a minor slight or a major crime. The internet is full of stories, some of them probably true, of getting even with an abusive spouse or an abusive boss or a philandering spouse or a corrupt coworker or a dishonest business. And it's discomfortingly agreeable to read the various fables and tables being turned. But there's also something troubling about it, isn't there? Don't we know that behind the interpersonal conflicts that we have as a people, the conflicts that we have as a nation, and certainly the international conflicts that we have, is this desire to get even? And how difficult it is to get even when some wrong is done and another wrong is done and another wrong is done, and it just keeps going. As the old Irish song Out of the Troubles puts it, an eye for an eye and another eye for another eye until everyone is blind. And so it's difficult. If you keep going down the road of vengeance, down the road of getting even, you may end up destroying your enemy, but in the process destroy yourself as well. And we sometimes don't know what it even means to get even. The story in Luke 9 speaks to this. Jesus and his disciples have begun their long journey from Galilee up to Jerusalem. And they're making their way through Samaritan territory, and they come to this Samaritan village, and they want perhaps to buy food or find lodging for the night or whatever, but they're turned away. And Jesus' disciples, James and John, are pretty enthusiastic about this opportunity. They say, should we call down fire from heaven and consume them? Now you notice it said that should we do this? That is James and John. They didn't ask Jesus if he would do it. And so they imagine that because this Samaritan village has affronted them, they have the right to destroy them. Now, the Samaritans are kind of Jewish cousins related to them in many ways. They have their own form of the Torah. At one point, they had their own temple on Mount Gerizim. And in fact, they still exist. They're reduced to maybe 900 of them still in Israel and on the West Bank. So this response to Jesus and his intended destination to go up to Jerusalem was not unexpected. But James and John, flushed with the success of their recent mission and with Jesus' recent mighty works, are eager, if Jesus will let them, to call down fire from heaven and destroy these ingrates who refuse Jesus. In some ancient texts, they say, let us call down fire from heaven like Elijah did. Now, you don't even need to know that to see that probably the disciples were thinking about Elijah in the first place. We heard one story about Elijah this morning, but there's another one, a pretty grim story at the beginning of 2 Kings chapter 1, where the king of Israel wants to arrest Elijah, and he sends a troop of 50 men to arrest Elijah, and the captain of this troop of 50 men says, "Man of God, come on down." And he says, "If I'm a man of God, I'm going to call down fire from heaven and consume all of you." And he does. And then the king of Israel, perhaps foolishly, sends a second troop of 50 men, and Elijah does the same thing. And then the third troop comes along, and the captain falls on his knees and says, "Have respect for our lives and the lives of these 50 men." And Elijah relents. And I suspect this was what James and John had in mind, consuming those rascals in the Samaritan village. But Jesus is having none of it. He turns and rebukes his disciples and perhaps Elijah as well. In some ancient manuscripts, Jesus tells them, "You don't know what kind of spirit you are, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy human lives, but to save them." Jesus was not there to call down fire from heaven, but as he would later say in Luke, to seek and save what was lost, and maybe to heal his disciples from their lust for power and their desire to destroy. Jesus did not want to get even with the Samaritans. He didn't even want God to get even with the Samaritans. There's a story in 2 Chronicles 24 where King Joash is apostatized. And he's confronted about his apostasy by a priest named Zechariah. And rather like Henry II, who had Archbishop Thomas Becket murdered in Canterbury Cathedral. And by the way, if you go to Canterbury Cathedral, they have it very helpfully marked in the front of the sanctuary where he was murdered, in case you're wondering. But rather like this, he had Zechariah murdered in the very temple. And as Zechariah is dying, he says, "May the Lord see this and call you to account." When Jesus is getting killed, when he's on the cross, he looks over his opponents and his killers and he prays, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And as Stephen is being stoned to death, and at his last, he says something very similar, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." For that matter, neither Jesus nor Stephen nor anyone else in the New Testament ever said that we needed to get even with someone for the death of Jesus. Now, let me say a couple of things here. None of this should be taken to mean that we should not pursue justice when we've been wronged. There's a difference between justice and revenge. The person who's robbed or assaulted or defrauded has the right to pursue in law the person who's done such things. And Paul argues that this is the very role of civil society and civil government. But we are not to pursue private vengeance, nor are we to seek vengeance that is disproportionate to the wrong. All the way back in the book of Genesis, Lamech tells his two wives, he brags, "I've killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. Cain may have been avenged 7 times, but Lamech is avenged 77 times. Now, if that sounds a little bit familiar, it may be because Jesus probably had this passage in mind when he told Peter that he was to forgive not 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. Forgiveness, not vengeance, was the way of Jesus. Look, Christian discipleship is hard. In a world full of revenge fantasies, lethal and otherwise, we are called to live out of a different story. We are called to model a different way of living, to put aside our normal inclination like Lamech to intensify our vengeance, or like Elijah to prove ourselves at others' expense. We seek peace and pursue it. And in our discipleship, we do not coerce. We are not violent. In the first letter of Peter, he suggests that if a Jesus follower is mistreated and endures it, he or she is simply following in the steps of Jesus, who committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. The late 19th, early 20th century British writer G.K. Chesterton once said, "Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried." However difficult, it is to us to model a different way of being in the world, a counter-narrative to the vengeance and violence, a model given to us by Jesus and indeed by God, God's self. In my seminar last week on Christian nationalism, I mentioned that the advocates of Christian nationalism imagine that people need to be coerced into doing the right thing, threatened into doing the right thing, and punished severely if they don't. But this is neither the way of the Christian faith or of the God of the Christian faith. In spite of stories to the contrary, in spite of that fire falling from heaven, as the Bible unfolds, we are told that God does not coerce, God invites. In the story of Noah, we're told that God destroyed the world because every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart were only evil all the time. After the flood, God decides not to destroy the world again. And why does he decide not to destroy the world again? Because every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. The reason that God chooses not to destroy the world is the same reason that God gave for destroying it. You could say that there's a sense in which in this story God learns that coercing humans to do good things in the long run does not work. And so Jesus tells his disciples that God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends his rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God uses persuasion and love, not coercion and violence, and he uses them through us. Look, there are times I'd love to have the ability to call down fire from heaven. It's probably a good thing I can't. I can't call down fire, but I can call up love. I can't call down fire, but I can call up forgiveness. I can't call down fire, but I can call up generosity, gratefulness, and hope. Or as Paul put it in the passage we read from Galatians, we live from the fruit of the Spirit, love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control, rather than hatred and discourse and jealousy and rage and dissensions and factions and envy, which our world and our country are torn by. Now, we can't do this on our own. This is why we come together. This is why we worship together. This is why we learn together and challenge each other together. This is why we go to the table together, so that we can become individually and corporately a people who live out of a different story, who model another way of life, who love each other and the world with intensity and joy. May it be so. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.